do have a PowerPoint and I am going to follow it. Um, and as you can see, I thought I would talk about education for a partnership future because that's really what we as futurists are trying to do. And I'm going to share with you also my frame. I'm very passionate about this work, and that passion is very much rooted in my childhood as a child refugee with my parents from the Nazis. And from one day to the next, my whole world was rent asunder. My parents and I became hunted with license to kill. And I won't go into details except to say that this brought up for me uh, some questions that I think many of us have asked at some point in our lives. The question that my multidisciplinary, uh, transhistorical, transcultural research tries to answer the question of why, when we humans have such a great capacity for consciousness, for caring, for creativity, why has there been so much cruelty, insensitivity, and destructiveness? Does it really have to be this way? You know, we hear all these wonderful stories that we've inherited from the past, like original sin, selfish genes, we're bad, right? And so naturally, we have to be rigidly controlled from the top, as in God-fearing, right? Um, so the question for me was, is there an alternative? And my life has been devoted really to telling this new story about human nature and human possibilities. And I have written quite a few books jointly with others. One of them, The Partnership Way, is actually a companion um, for both The Chalice and the Blade and for Sacred Pleasure that I wrote with my late husband, David Loy, who debunked a another false story because we've been told so many false stories, and that's about Darwin. David Loy, he wrote Darwin's Lost Theory, which I highly, highly recommend, or
Hello, Riane.
Rediscovering.
Sorry
Yes,
to interrupt. Would you be able to click the play for your PowerPoint at the bottom right-hand corner? You see a play button.
wait a minute,
Yep,
play.
yes, right there.
It
To more to your
comments,
right. More to your right.
um,
More, one more, two more, two more.
two more,
Yes, that's right.
slideshow.
Yes.
Oh, you mean it hasn't been playing?
No, no. There you go.
Oh my
Thank you.
gosh.
It's all right. It's
That's much
okay.
better. Now I
Now
can
we
Oh
are
see you
my
here.
really well.
Now we
gosh.
are here.
Well, I thought it was, and I'm so glad that you interrupted me. Well, as I said, I've devoted my life to telling a new story about human nature and human possibilities. And but now I really don't know how to do my slides. Um, what do I do next? Because it takes up the whole screen.
You have the keys, left, right button keys. Do you have it on your keyboard? You
Uh,
have those
left
arrow keys. Do you see the arrow keys?
the arrow keys. Oh,
Yeah. Yes. So you hit the right arrow. Yeah,
all
that's
right,
right.
I did. Thank you. I'm learning all kinds of things from you. I am at my advanced age trying to be somewhat technologically with it. So I appreciate all the help. And I started, as those of you familiar with the Chalice and the Blade know, I started by, well, with a much larger database, um, one that includes the whole of humanity, yes, both its male and female forms and everybody in between, uh, the whole of our history, including that long period of time called our prehistory, and yes, where we all live in our family and other intimate relations. In other words, the whole of our lives, which if you look, and I'm getting ahead of my story in a sense, but if you look at our conventional categories, right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, capitalist, socialist, they do not, well, they marginalize or ignore nothing less than the majority of humanity, women and children, and hence family. And we are learning from neuroscience that family is where we first acquire our norms, most of us. But anyway, you can see some of the art of prehistory and like the woman figure of a faceless woman carved at the mouth of a Paleolithic or Old Stone Age shrine, the Venus of La Salle. In one hand, she points to her vulva. It's very clearly etched. In the other hand, she has a crescent moon with 13 notches, which are the lunar cycles, but also in the absence, especially in the absence of lighting, like, we invented, the cycles of women's menstrual cycles, which of course are necessary to give life. Nature, from Minoan Crete, an octopus, we're today finding out much more about octopi and what incredible creatures, how bright they are, really, and how nurturing they are. And of course, the figure of a goddess figure from Malta, and at the bottom, a man and a woman sharing the couch, not with the woman standing behind the couch, as in Greek times, which already oriented more. What do I have to do now? I have to go to the bottom, right? And find my next slide, which I can't find. Guide me once again,
Oh,
please.
do you remember those arrows that you found on your keyboard?
I can't
Press
find
the
on the keyboard.
Yes.
Yeah,
If
the
you
arrow
press the
key.
right arrow, there you go.
Yeah. So what I discovered, and what, of course, Lavon mentioned, is Einstein said this. He said we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking, of consciousness that created them. And indeed, my work introduces what I want to introduce to those of you who don't know my work, the domination partnership social scale, which introduces new inclusive categories that reveal otherwise hidden social configurations. And it is a scale. It's always a matter of degree, okay? So if you look at the domination system configuration, it starts with family, which is so ignored in so much of our universities, or siloed, so that most of us don't even learn about family relations, child development, but it is in its purer form, authoritarian, ranking-based structure with rigid hierarchies of domination in the family, in economics, and in society. There's fear, abuse, and violence. A high degree of fear and violence has to be built into the system, into domination systems, ranging from child and wife beating to abuse by, quote, superiors in families, workplaces, and societies. Gender. We've all been taught, haven't we, that gender is, quote, just an ancillary, a women's issue, right? Well, it happens to be a primary family, social, and economic organizing principle, if you really think about it. And what you have in the domination system, and we're seeing it reemerge like crazy these days is the ranking of male over female with rigid gender stereotypes with, quote, masculine traits and activities such as toughness and conquest ranked over, quote, feminine ones, such as caregiving and nonviolence. And yes, narratives and language are different, because in the domination system, beliefs and stories justify and idealize, like our epics, right, that we've inherited, domination and violence, which are deemed inevitable, moral, and desirable, at least in men. Now, this is what we don't see through the lens of conventional categories, because all of these very different societies, very different, according to the conventional lenses of right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, share the domination configuration. I mean, think about it. The Eastern religious regimes of the Taliban and fundamentalist Iran, right? They share this configuration. Western secular societies like the rightist Nazi Germany and leftist Stalin's Soviet Union, African societies like the traditional Maasai, they all have the domination configuration starting really with the subordination of women. Now, the partnership system configuration is very different. You have a family, economic, and social structure that is democratic. And yes, it has hierarchies. This is one of the big mistakes we make. We think that the alternative really is a completely flat organization where everybody consents to everything. Well, if you want full consensus, you're asking for a domination system, because the person who won't consent can hold you up forever, can't that person? So it has, look, families, every society needs families. It needs parents or teachers. It needs managers. It needs leaders. But they're hierarchies of actualization rather than hierarchies of domination. And power is not viewed the same way. Remember the cover of those of you who have read The Chalice and the Blade. It's not blade power, it's chalice power. And it is nurturing power rather than taking of life. It's the nurturing of life, and yes, the illuminating of life. But caring is economically valued. We don't do that in either socialism or capitalism. And I'll get back to that. And there are caring and equitable adult relations as the norm, and parenting, because children do need some limits. They need some rules. It's authoritative, which is a term being used very much today by parenting experts rather than authoritarian. Fear, abuse, and violence. Yes, there's some, but it doesn't have to be built in to maintain top-down rankings, be it man over man, man over women, race over race, religion over religion, humans over nature. Gender roles and relations, you have an equal valuing. See, it's not sameness that we're after. It is equal valuing of the fluid gender roles, which we are in some areas at least moving to against enormous resistance and pushback, aren't we? With a high valuing of empathy, caring, caregiving, and nonviolence in both women and men and everybody in between, as well as in social and economic policy. And of course, narratives and language, beliefs and stories present mutually beneficial, nonviolent relations, sustainable relations as normal, moral, and desirable, recognizing that we have a capacity also, of course, for domination and violence. Now, I won't go into this, but for millennia, we have the evidence. Human societies oriented more to the partnership side of the continuum. Foraging societies, in my latest book, which was published by Oxford University Press, Nurturing Our Humanity. It draws very heavily from neuroscience, and my co-author is Douglas Fry, who is an expert on foraging societies. And he calls them in an article for our journal, which is the interdisciplinary journal of partnership studies. And he writes of them as the original partnership societies. Early farming societies like Çatalhöyük, which are getting play these days in all kinds of books, but without the frame. It's like, oh, we don't have to because look at that. But it doesn't tell you what you have to build, for goodness sakes, in order to build a partnership future. And yes, the so-called high civilization of Minoan Crete, the first paved roads, the first indoor plumbing, which impresses, Westerners very much. And it's still oriented more to the partnership side. And today we see this configuration or movement toward it in Nordic societies like Finland, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. They are not socialists. They are caring societies. They have caring policies. And I'll get into that. There are also many trends in this direction in the United States. So we've been stuck in the wrong story. And it is up to us, right versus left, capitalist versus socialist, Eastern versus Western, religious, secular. They fragment our consciousness, don't they? And none of these categories tell us, because there have been violent and repressive societies in every one of these categories. None of them tell us what we need to build as an alternative, do they? And yes, they marginalize the majority of humanity, women, children, and therefore family. Now, this is really the very important part. I mean, you need this background, but you also need to know that, of course, we need tactics. I mean, domination systems are trauma factories, whether it's in families, and one of the links I put there is an interview of me with the Scientific Americans on how the domination system starting in families causes trauma and therefore denial, be it climate change denial or elections change denial or COVID-19 denial, it doesn't matter. But the point that I really want to make is that we also need strategic interventions in not only symptoms. I mean, racism is an in-group versus out-group way of thinking, but it starts really with the in-group of mankind and the female other. I mean, think of the Jungian archetypes. Woman is either man's temptation or man's inspiration. She has no identity, none. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. All right. So what are they? Childhood and family, gender, which we're taught to marginalize, economics, and narratives and language. Now, why? Neuroscience, and I'll go through this quickly. You can read Nurturing Our Humanity in details this, but children's experiences and observations in the first years of life shape the architecture of nothing less than our brains. And this in turn shapes how we feel, how we think, how we act, and yes, how we vote. Now, raising children and how they're raised is not just a family issue, as we've been told. It's a family, economic, and social issue. And this is not a matter of women against men or men against women. I mean, men have had to give nothing less than their lives because some guy on top, like a Putin, wants more real estate, right? That's the domination system. This is better for everyone. Now, the second cornerstone, and I'll go through them quickly because I want to talk with you rather than just to you. Gender conditioning becomes the template through which we perceive all human differences. Think about it for a moment. What does a child learn in a family or a subculture where that orients rigidly towards the domination side? It learns to equate difference, beginning with the difference in form, which is a basic difference in our species between the female form and the male form, and then is generalized to all outgroups like racism, anti-Semitism, Shia versus Sunni, Sunni versus Shia. It doesn't really matter. That's what the child learns, is that difference is equated with superiority or inferiority, with dominating or being dominated, with being served or serving, right? So when we learn that traits associated with, quote, real masculinity, like domination, like really violence. You remember, it used to be this thing that men are naturally violent. Well, men may be more equipped to learn violence, but violence is learned. We know that as futurists. And if you really associate this with what boys, I mean, the definition of manhood for boys and men is so negative, it's not being like a woman, right? It's not being, quote, feminine. Well, anyway, this is a fundamental issue, and I'm very much connected with the men's movement for that reason, as well as the feminist or women's movement. Now, partnership-oriented societies, remember, like Finland, Sweden, Norway, they have caring policies, universal health care, high-quality, accessible child care, generous paid parental leave, support for a carbon-free natural environment, caring. Caring as the status of women rises, and in these nations, women, well, having a woman head of state is nothing. It's like, yeah. But that 40 to 50% of their national members of parliament are female. And it's not that women are better, but women as a group are socialized to be caring, to be nurturing, right? Well, we need to also socialize boys to be caring, because men, I mean, I can speak from my own experience. My husband was one of the most caring human beings, David Loy. I mean, he died 3 years ago, and I still weep when I think of it, that I'm no longer, we had wonderful 45 years. But anyway, as the status of women rises, so does the value of traits and activities that are relegated to women in domination systems. And as does the number of men engaged in these activities. Now, here we come to economics, the third cornerstone. And both capitalism and socialism follow a gendered system of values that fails to adequately value and reward the work of caring for people and caring for nature. And both Smith and Marx subscribe to this, because in both capitalism and socialism, caring for people and nature is economically invisible, reproductive. Remember, they made a distinction between productive and reproductive, which is totally insane. I mean, so we have GDP, for example, which follows this hidden system of gendered values. When a tree is part of GDP, when it's dead, when it's a log, but not the forest. A forest doesn't count, even though we depend on forests for breathing, for goodness sakes. But this is it. We have worked. Well, GDP and GMP does not count the economic value of the three life-sustaining sectors of the economy. Now, this is vital. The household economy, the natural economy, and the community volunteer economies. And you know, if we don't change, and I wrote a whole book on that called, as Lavon said, The Real Wealth of Nations. Yes, it's a play with some hubris, I'm afraid, on Smith's The Wealth of Nations. But the real wealth of nations are the contributions of people and of nature. And people include caring for people starting at birth. And that's the kind of metrics that we absolutely need. And we need it not only as women, but as men, and all humans need it. And you know what? There have been studies measuring the value of the unpaid household work, like a study from Australia, 50%, 50% of the reported GDP. So it isn't that we don't have the data, but it's up to us to make the data visible, including a book that we, foreshadowing all of this, was a book that we did and a study that we did at the Center for Partnership Systems, then the Center for Partnership Studies, called Women, Men, and the Global Quality of Life, showing that the status of women is a powerful predictor of everyone's globally, the quality of life. This and more studies are showing this, but the domination storybook, of course, includes original sin, selfish genes. It ignores the evidence from archaeology, from mythology, from linguistics, even from DNA studies about millennia of human cultural evolution before the shift to domination systems 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, which is a blip. I mean, a nothing, a drop in the evolutionary bucket. So there are many resources that you can access. Of course, my books, but there is the partnership toolkit just to measure. It's kind of a self-assessment tool. There are the websites, my website, rianeeisler.com, the Center for Partnership Systems website. And I really invite all of you to make use of these resources. They're there for you, because our job right now is not, at least in the United States, but also globally, we're seeing a regression to domination, aren't we? I mean, what does the MAGA movement emphasize? It emphasizes gender, childhood, got to control what your children are exposed to, not to let them learn that there is an alternative, right? A partnership alternative, economics, and yes, story and language. And they're brilliant at it, but so are we. And the fact that there was this shift during our prehistory from millennia of partnership to domination means that we can change it again, but only by paying attention to these four cornerstones and showing that there is a better alternative, connecting the dots. So I thank you, and I'm ready to stop the share and talk with you now rather than just to you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Riane. My head is full. And I have so many questions, and I am sure lots of folks do. since we have so many people on this Zoom, I'm thinking that maybe a good way of doing it would be to raise your hand using the raise hand function, and Anissa will keep her eye out for folks who have questions, and she'll call our attention to it. I can start off, certainly. I have one question that's been kind of niggling at me for a while, and it's how and why. Are there any ideas about how and why we did shift from
Yes,
partnership to
there are
domination?
many theories. The most popular theory is that it was the technological shift to agriculture, and with it to more accumulation of private property. However, however, there are tribal societies that today have shifted towards, indigenous societies that have shifted where there isn't much private property and there is hardly any agriculture. I don't believe, I believe in what the archaeologist Maria Gimbutas brought out, which at least in Europe, there is no question at this point, because even DNA studies show a replacement of genes, okay? At precisely the time when she said the first Indo-European invasions began from the steppes, from the more arid. See, we don't. I've written a paper called "Cultural Shifts and Technological Phase Changes." You have to consider what kind of culture, and the shift that has been ignored is the shift from foraging to pastoralism, to herding in the arid areas, where, if you will, the earth was not a good mother to us. But there's no question that the domination system started to take over at that point, and that it spread with this later in the Bronze Age. It spread into India, for example, Mohenjo-daro. I mean, we're just trying to put this new story together. And much of the evidence has been lost, and frankly, some of it has been suppressed. And it's up to us to bring it out, because if it's inevitable, if domination is inevitable, why bother, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. Julie, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. First, Dr. Eisler, major fangirl of yours. Just want to say you have a lot of people on this call that really admire you. I get a little bit choked up about it. So, several of us are from the University of Houston and have read your work and written papers about you, and just are really grateful for your time today. I have a lovely husband partner who's making my dinner right now, and a daughter that's listening to the call in the background. And, we here in the US, some of us are having a hard time. And there's some things going on that, as you've mentioned tonight, make life a little harder. And, we're figuring our way through that. But what gives you hope right now, Dr. Eisler? Like, what are some things happening in the world that really make you hopeful? I feel like I see everything telling me not to be hopeful. So what's something that makes you hopeful?
Well, we are unquestionably in a time of regression towards a more rigid domination system, because, like in the United States, where you are, Jill, we're a mix, aren't we? What makes me hopeful is, first of all, the findings from my work, that there is an alternative, and that, as we know, we've been told the wrong story about human nature. And that's all, by the way, in nurturing our humanity, which I suggest that you can get from, well, either Oxford University Press sells it, but it, we have a lot of evidence, but it's all in pieces. And this book tries to make it, well, connect the dots, if you will. And what we're finding is that things being equal, we want more than anything else caring connection as human beings. But we're told that it has to be in this hierarchy of domination, right? And that is a lie. And also we're told by people, well-meaning people, that there are no hierarchies. And again, that is not true, but it depends on how power is conceptualized. So we're talking about a real revolution in consciousness. And what gives me hope is, number one, the regression in a sense, because the regression is a reaction against thousands of NGOs working all over the world, really. But they lack the frame. And so many of them just want somebody else on the top of the domination pyramid, you know, another race, another gender, another. And no, that's not what the opposite of patriarchy is not matriarchy, it is partnership. Matriarchy and patriarchy are conceptually the same, two sides of the domination coin. And this is where language comes in, doesn't it?
Amen. Thank you. JT, I see you have your hand raised as well.
Yes, hi, thank you. And I'll echo Julie's sentiments as well. It's just been so great to have you here. And you know, when I first read Chalice and the Blade, it was really quite life-changing in a lot of ways, from your perception changing anyways. And I think one of the key things that for me spoke to me is exactly what you're saying, what you just said, which is around the opposite of patriarchy is partnership.
Yes.
And but that's not the narrative that, you know, I had grown up with quite a bit, and being in, you know, very much a supporter of equality and partnership. But then when I got into the narratives to try to support that, it became very much an us and them kind of an aspect. And in my work, I see that still continuing, both in gender, where I've talked with young men and teenagers, male teenagers, that feel targeted, even though that they themselves may or may not have done anything. They feel like they've been told that they're the problem. And the same thing I think is a little bit true with what we're seeing with DEI in the United States right now, is where the narrative around it seems to be, for some people, seems to have been that they're told that what they have done is wrong and bad. And so now they're going to take something from somebody and give it to somebody else. And that's just sort of, again, feels very much like a dominant kind of response and story to it, which is not, those of us that work in DEI too, that's not what it is. So I'm curious just about some of your thoughts about that, like taking that idea of gender and how you have told that narrative into something around other otherness and DEI and equality, and how do we get to a world where we can get everybody or a lot of people on board with this idea and not have them feel like they're being attacked, I think is where I'm coming from on
Yes, well, this is a challenge for us, isn't it? Because, as you said, we're trying to fly the plane, if you will, while we're building it, right? And we have one foot trying to survive in a domination-oriented economy, society, family, whatever, and another foot in trying to build something better. And it's not easy. It is hard, okay? And we should not hold ourselves, I think, to a standard of perfection. And anger is a good emotion, especially for women. It was anger at the system. I mean, I'm a feminist, but I don't use the term because it means to people, it's gotten a bad rap. You know, it's been the victim, because there are many feminisms, and yes, some women are against men, but they're a minority. Most feminists are not against men. But as I always say, we don't just want a peace a bigger piece of the existing economic pie. We want to bake a better economic pie. It's a women's metaphor, if you will. So I don't have an answer for you except the one that you are giving yourself, aren't you? To do our best to not fall into the trap of us against them. At the same time, that realistically, we're fighting for our lives here. I mean, against a massive, massive regression. I mean, think about it for a moment. And one of the second Compass article that is in the chat, and these are very short pieces, by the way, because I thought, you know, I'd like people to start with the interview of me at the Scientific American, which highlights family, which we're told to marginalize, of course, along with children and women who were once confined to families. I mean, that's why it's so marginalized. But the Compass articles, and you know, the Compass is a futurist publication, of course. And I'd love to have you write about the partnership alternative so that other futurists, because look, the future depends on us. We just can't be us against them. We have to, they're going to dismantle everything, okay? But the problem is that again and again, we see that the old institutions are tainted by this ethos of domination of nature, of people, of, you know, but be it colonialism, be it the extraction and, you know, the whole exploitation economy that, I mean, but for I have to say this, if you look at the organized social movements over the last 300 years since the industrial disequilibrium, you know, caused by the industrial revolution going into high gear, they've all challenged the tradition of domination, including the environmental movement, challenging man's once hallowed conquest and domination of nature. We have to connect the dots. We need the frame. And I'm going to stop talking so much because I want to hear from all of you. But
Sabrina, you have your hand up.
I know I haven't given you a complete answer, and I've sort of, but it's up to us to tell new stories as futurists, I think.
Yeah, and maybe it's up to us to find those ways as well, right? To
Yes. Well, that's
experiment.
the thing. It's not just power with, it's power to, our creative power. Remember, in the Middle Ages, a man who was creative was considered beyond the pale, effeminate, right? And then came the Renaissance, which was in part, but only in part, challenging the domination system. You know,
Thank you.
primogeniture was challenged, and then we had a regression. Well, we can't afford any further regressions. This has to be counted.
Sabrina, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. Dr. Eisler, I thank you so much for being here. Your work is a new find for me, but it's very reminiscent to the studies that I did in systems. There seems to be a lot of that in what you're saying, an understanding of systems, even starting with the unit of the family. And so I wonder, I'd love to hear you talk more about change by way of linguistics, because I do think that some of the terms that have perpetuated and sustained the dominant, the dominant way has been, or dominant paradigms have been in the language that we continue to perpetuate even ourselves as futurists. And so past-based language, masculine-based language, and my personal disfavorite, the use of the term white when we all know that white is not this, or it's black. So I wonder I would love to hear from you what you perceive or, can envision would happen if, and you mentioned even in terms of writing more in Compass and, in other publications that talk that we as futurists submit to, that if we kind of took on or challenged ourselves to begin to change some of this vernacular, what do you see as some possibilities there?
Well, this is where human creativity comes in big time, doesn't it? Uh, we on our website, if you go to the very top, I think it's under media, there are examples of changes of language. Like, for example, that awful saying of you kill two birds with one stone. Well, why not say to hatch two birds with one egg? This is a new way of expressing the same thoughts, the same idea, but it doesn't involve violence against birds. It doesn't involve killing. It doesn't idealize killing. Um, there have been trends in that direction, and I'm writing an article on words. And one of our initiatives, which we are launching in September, is the Peace Begins at Home initiative, which is very much connected with language because, for example, the term domestic violence has been so marginalized. So why not call it family violence or violence in the family? You see what I'm saying? I mean, we have some of the terms, it's just using different terms. We have a lot of problems with the pronouns. As you well know, most languages, certainly the Romance languages are a disaster. But one way of dealing with that is to use uh, uh, a term that isn't gender specific, like there it has been one, or he or she, or he/she. There have been trends towards changing language, but it has to be organized. And frankly, one of our major problems is language. There's no question about it. The language holds us back. So anything that you can do with language, and you might want to publish also in the Interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership Studies. And I'd love to have quite a few articles on partnership in your journal, in Futures, because that, and I see that your Jules Rush is shaking her head. Yes, I'm counting on you because if people hear the same old stories again and again and again, people have to be made aware that we are being told the wrong stories and that much of our language, frankly, is the language we've inherited. Finnish does not have a pronoun for he and she. Now, isn't that interesting? It's you don't have to have that. And that is, I think, part of it. But the language issue is a huge issue, and I'm glad you've brought it up, Sabrina.
Thank you so much.
Anyone else? A question? Just raise your hand, jump into the chat.
Because otherwise, I'm just going to keep talking. So you have to.
Well, I have about 1,000 questions, so but I don't want to dominate. I don't want to dominate this this session, but I will ask one that in the sort of the pause when everyone gathers their thoughts. I've been wondering how even if we have a partnership system, I feel like I've been doing a lot of thinking about how they can survive when, if you have a small partnership system that's growing and everyone's loving it, what happens when a dominant system comes in and tries to squash it? There's been a lot of thinking. Cece and I are editing a special issue of JFS around sort of feminist thinking and futures. And many of the articles are asking, how can we have feminist international relations, for example? Several countries adopted it, and now it seems like they're being abandoned because they were more partnership, and now because there are so many external threats, they feel that a dominance-based approach is more relevant or more will
Well,
help.
this again, you've brought up one of the really important questions. As a Holocaust survivor, I don't believe in unilateral disarmament. The shift has to be global, and the good news is that there are people in all cultures who yearn for something better, who are trying, but many of them just want somebody else to be on top of the pyramid. And I think that this is one reason, and only one reason, that this new frame, which isn't so new, I wrote Chalice, which is still going strong. It was first published by Harper Harper and Row at the time in 1986. So it isn't a new idea, but it's catching on more now because people are more ready and more desperate, frankly. It has to be global, and this is why, for example, it's so important. I was talking about before we joined the larger group, about some of my books being available in Chinese, being available in other languages. Even in Urdu, my book on partnership education is available in Urdu, of all things. But let's face it, I mean, fundamentalist Iran is a domination system. And fundamentalism, it's domination fundamentalism is what we should call it, not religious fundamentalism, because that's all it's about. It's about male dominance, about controlling children, about and there are some partnership elements like in Islam, but there is also in the Quran, beating your wife, but not in the face, so it doesn't show. I mean, it's awful, isn't it? The stories that we've inherited, but people are, and religion is in. I have in my book, The Power of Partnership. I suggest something that I wish that religious leaders would take on, which is sorting the chaff from the grain in our scriptures. Because at the center of our scriptures are so-called, well, if you will, partnership feminine teachings. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, caring, compassion, empathy, nonviolence. But then there's this tremendous overlay of domination teachings. And, when I saw that, it was like, oh, so that's why, we have this, vilification of Eve, for example, for seeking knowledge. When I was a kid, I used to wonder, in the Bible it says, henceforth, woman will be subservient to man. And I always wanted to know, well, what was it like before the henceforth? And nobody wanted to talk about that. Well, I had to do my own research. And then I also wanted to know, why would Eve, a woman, first woman, want to talk to a snake? I mean, we don't usually do that. But the snake was a symbol of oracular prophecy, even in the Oracle of Delphi, much less in the Minoan goddess figurines. They have snakes coiled around their arms. It is a symbol of oracular prophecy. The Pythoness already in Greek times, which were very domination oriented already. There was a whole book that I have a chapter on called The Reign of the Phallus, about ancient Athens, because that's big phalluses were the thing to have in your backyard, so to speak. But anyway, I'm going on, and we only have 1 minute.
We have 1 minute of, and thank you so much. Carrie, I see you've had your hand raised for quite a while. Did you want to ask a super quick question? And I can stay for a few minutes beyond. I know some people may have to hop, but
Yeah,
I'd love
but
to get
I'm
one last
willing to
question.
stay for a few minutes too.
Thank
But
you.
if you want to end at the hour, this is the hour. If you want to go another half hour, I've reserved the time.
Oh, I think we can keep going because I see Julie wants to keep going. So we'll stay for a little bit longer, but Carrie, let's go to you.
Hi, sorry. This is amazing. Also, just FYI, I'm here with the reason why I'm here. She happened to be on a field trip and I just picked her up. So I appreciate you. I thank you for this. I wanted to follow up that question with the idea of, do you feel like the fluctuation between dominance and partnership systems is related to chaos theory and how we will naturally always go out of a state of stability to a state of chaos?
Well, look, I draw in the Chalice and the Blade and other work a lot from chaos theory, nonlinear dynamics, but I don't think that there's an inevitability in history. Okay, and if we could have a partnership orientation, well, first of all, the domination system is taking us to an evolutionary dead end, between the conquest of nature, between technologies of total destruction, like bacteriological and nuclear warfare. It's not sustainable, is it? So, but we oriented to partnership for millennia, and it seems to be what we humans want and need. I mean, look at all these terribly unhappy people on the top, these angry men, I mean, they're all traumatized, deeply traumatized people. And we know this from many works. Alice, what was her name? Miller, I think was her last name, wrote about the childhood of Hitler and so on. But we need a frame because domination has a frame, which they are all following. And it's unfortunately perpetuated by much in our scriptures, much in our religions. And this is a real problem because I mean, I wrote a letter to the Pope asking him to endorse our Peace Begins at Home campaign because he's writing a something on the family. But we're not taught to take the family into account, are we? So we need a new frame. And it's the partnership domination scale. It does give us that frame.
Thank you, Riane. Do you have any other questions?
Well, I've always been an outsider, and I used to want more than anything else to belong. But the thing is that being an outsider made it possible for me to use a cliche, think outside the box. So let's think outside the box.
Wow, I think thank you so much. That's a wonderful note for us to end on. It's been such an honor to have you with us, Dr. Eisler. A round of applause. Oh, Sabrina, I see. Did you also raise your hand? Okay, good. I'll just close out then because I feel like we can sort of radiate all of these feelings into the universe.
Wait, I have one
Yes.
thing.
Okay.
And then what I'm thinking of is the University of Houston There is a man at the University of Arkansas, Lawrence Hare, who wrote a syllabus because he teaches world history using the partnership domination continuum. If you can get that syllabus and spread it, I would like to see education become, of course, much more transdisciplinary, which there is a trend in that direction, but it's because universities are so siloed, it's really hard and so hierarchical too. But we can try. We have to try, is what it amounts to. But I do want to talk about spreading this through education is very, very important. And this is really why I was so happy to talk with all of you. And I bless you all. And I see so many of you as writing about partnership and using your a sphere of influence. That's how it starts. And that's how it continues. But that's all I wanted to say.
I see in the chat, Sabrina is saying, please come back for a part 2. And how cool would a conversation with Dr. Eisler, Teach the Future, and CLA be? That would be pretty amazing. I agree. But for now, we'll close out part 1. I thank you so much for coming, and for you all so much for coming. Many of us are educators, and I think we're really well positioned to spread some of this, and now we're inspired to do so as well.
Well, you have the permission to use the PowerPoint if it's useful to you.
Oh, wonderful. Anybody who wants to have the PowerPoint, then you can email me. I'll put my email in the chat.